Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating and, let's be honest, pretty controversial topic, the biblical verse about women covering their heads. We're going to break down the logic from a specific sermon that tackles this head on. Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to look at the verse that kicks this all off. Then, we'll get into the core principle the pastor builds his entire argument on. After that, we'll check out the historical evidence he brings in, and finally, we'll see where it all leads, his final conclusion. All right, first up, the verse at the very heart of the sermon. Everything, and I mean everything, builds from this one specific passage in 1 Corinthians. So here it is. But every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. It is the same as having her head shaved. The whole point of the sermon is to unpack that last part. Why is an uncovered head seen as the exact same thing as the pretty severe act of being shaved? Okay, so that raises some big questions, right? What exactly is this head that's being dishonored? And how in the world is not wearing a covering the same as having a shaved head? Well, to get to the bottom of that, the pastor first lays down a foundational principle. And here is where it gets really interesting. According to the sermon, this isn't just some random rule. Nope, it's all based on a very specific 4-level structure of divine authority. The pastor breaks it down like a spiritual chain of command. You can see it right here. At the very top, you have God. God is the head of Christ. Then, Christ is the head of man. And finally, man is the head of woman. So in this teaching, when the Bible says head, it means leader or authority figure. That's the key. So dishonoring your head isn't just a personal slight. It's about defying this entire spiritual structure. And in this view, for a woman, that means dishonoring the man, who is her designated head. Okay, but how does all this hierarchy stuff connect back to the whole uncovered head versus shaved head thing? Well, this is where the pastor's central argument comes in. He ties it all to a really powerful symbol of shame found throughout the Old Testament. He draws a direct, one-to-one line. He's saying that for a woman to pray with her head uncovered is symbolically the exact same thing as having her head shaved. But why? Why is a shaved head considered so incredibly shameful in this interpretation? To explain that, the sermon digs deep into the Old Testament for examples. And what's really fascinating when you look at these examples is the pattern that emerges. I mean, it's incredibly consistent. You've got deep personal mourning, like with Job. You have divine punishment, national humiliation. Across the board, shaving the head is a sign of total loss, disaster, and shame. It's a visible symbol that your protector, your authority, your covering is gone. The sermon really hammers this point home with these key examples. You see Job, in his darkest moment of personal grief, shaves his head. The people of Moab do it when their nation is defeated. A captive woman has to do it to cut ties with her old life. And even the nation of Israel is told to shave its head as a punishment. It's always this visible sign of desolation, right? A marker that your authority has been stripped away. Then the pastor brings in this really vivid analogy from the book of Proverbs. A gold ring in a pig's snout. Ouch. He uses this to make the point that outward beauty means nothing. It's spiritually worthless, in fact, if it's not paired with obedience to this divine order. The external has to reflect the internal submission to the hierarchy. Okay, so this is where all the pieces come together. We've got the hierarchy, we've got the symbolism of shame, and now we're at the sermon's verdict on head coverings. This table does a great job of laying out the logic, so follow me here. A woman's long hair is presented as her glory, her beauty, okay? Shaving that hair is seen as a punishment that removes her glory. So the argument goes, if you disobey the hierarchy by not covering your head, you're essentially committing an act that deserves that same punishment. On the flip side, covering your head is the sign that you're willingly submitting. So the takeaway here is really crucial. The physical act of putting on a head covering isn't just about the covering itself. In this teaching, it's framed as an outward sign of an inner submission to this whole spiritual principle. It's the external proof of an internal belief. And ultimately, the argument boils down to a pretty stark choice. You've got submission, which is shown by covering the head, or you've got rebellion, shown by not covering it. And that rebellion, according to the sermon, leads directly to the consequence, the symbolic punishment of having your head shaved, which represents shame and loss. So, to sum it all up, the failure to cover one's head isn't seen as some minor mistake. Not at all. It's interpreted as a full-blown rejection of the entire divine system of authority. The big takeaway is that in this view, a seemingly small act carries an absolutely immense theological weight. And that's our breakdown of the sermon's logic. It really leaves us with a big question to chew on, doesn't it? How do we take these ancient texts with all their powerful symbols and figure out how they guide life and practice today? It's a challenge that continues to be debated.